I've taught some cases on culture, so that gives me a little bit of credibility, I hope, on that score. But on the venture piece, actually last year I took a leave to run a small startup in the fitness industry. So hopefully now I have more credibility on the entrepreneurial angle. So one of the things I want to do is to just give our panelists a chance to get a sense for who you are. So let me kind of ask you, how many of you are either first or second year MBAs? Okay, and alumni? All right, some alumni. And those of you who are alumni, how many are kind of on the entrepreneurial side doing ventures? All right, and any investors in ventures? I don't know. They don't want to put up their hands probably because they'll get hit up. Okay, great. So on our panel we have Andrew, Amy, Hossein, and Scott, and I'll let them kind of introduce themselves and say a little bit about their organization, their cultures.
James, you missed the Sloan Fellows. Scott and I are out of the Sloan Fellow program here. You asked what the MBA is.
You see? See, that's just because they've never let me teach the Sloans. So Sloans, one Sloan, any other Sloans? Okay. Now, hang on, I should remember this. Any PhD students, any doctoral students? They're locked away in their cubby holes studying and writing papers, which is good. Thank you for reminding me of that. The other bit of housekeeping that I should do is to ask you to turn off your PDAs and cell phones. We're taping, and I think we've got wireless mics and like a jumbo airliner. Any static could bring down the plane, or it could bring the wrath of Nancy on you, so please turn those off. All right, so the agenda is we're going to start and spend the first part of the conversation talking amongst the panelists. I've got some questions for them, and I'm going to encourage them to question and react to one another. And then the last 30 minutes, basically from 2:15 to 2:45, we'll open it up, and you can pepper them with your questions. All right, so let me just say a little bit about framing the topic and the question of building a distinct company culture. So the underlying premise is that a distinct culture is important to the success of a new venture, and that successful entrepreneurs, are very deliberate about creating and building a culture that supports their success. There are strategists who will tell you that in order for a culture to actually be a source of competitive advantage, it needs to have three different things. One, it's got to be valuable to the organization, a source of cost saving, differentiation, or revenue. It's got to be rare, the unique piece. And third, it's got to be difficult to imitate or copy, otherwise anybody could do it. So what I'd like to do is just give the panelists a chance to start out and just say a little bit about yourself and your company, and tell us, how would you describe, and how do people generally describe, the culture of your organization, and how is that related to its competitive strategy? So I could just go down from the right, or is anybody burning to? I think Scott kind of got nominated by Amy originally to go first, so we'll jump around.
Thank you. Cold called. I haven't been back in a long time to get cold called. So my background is primarily as a technologist. So I've been a co-founder in three public companies, 2 software companies, and 1 telecommunications company, and I'm now CEO of a 4th, which is venture-funded, stealth. And I can tell you that the big epiphany I had prior to coming to business school, I'd founded 2 companies, and both companies grew quite large, hundreds and hundreds of people, different locations. And one of the experiences I had before I came was I visited an outlying office that we had. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and about halfway through it, all I could think was, how did these people get in my company? What I realized was that the core group that we had started with was something that reflected the core values of the founders in a big way. And as the company grew very quickly, we lacked the methodology and the structure so that the culture could remain consistent as the company grew. And at that moment, when we thought about creating a new company, one of the things that became very important was trying to create a culture that I wanted, something that was durable and something that was scalable. So we actually spent a lot of time in that process of trying to come up with something that fit for all the founders. And in terms of creating value, I mean, it would take too long to share everything in the first blush, but I can tell you that the last company, Fiber Tower, which became a public company as well, We had the lowest turnover in the industry by far in our segment. We paid, our average salary was at the 50th percentile, compared to our peers. And, the employee satisfaction, the level of productivity we got out was really just great. So, there are very tangible benefits to investing in culture, some of which you can create, some of which are basically by virtue of your actions and so forth. But the net is, you're going to get a culture either way. But we tried to be more premeditated about doing it at Fiber Tower.
And if you were to sort of think of the just one or two characteristics that really like, okay, this is what's really different about our culture, what stands
So
out?
probably the single biggest thing is we became, passionate about feedback while we were here at the GSB. So touchy-feely, I don't know how many of you are GSB alums that have taken that. And we all had been in somewhat bureaucratic environments previously and saw feedback, institutionalizing it as a method of being able to increase the velocity of decision-making, reduce bureaucracy, and ultimately resolve issues before they come big. So we spent a lot of time implementing a feedback structure throughout the company, and it grew with the company, and quite frankly, we use it in our new company as well. I think that was probably the single most impactful tool we had at addressing issues when they came up immediately and not letting them fester.
Amy, do you want to?
Sure. My name is Amy Pressman. I'm the co-founder and president of a company called Medallia. We are a technology company that provides technology that wires really large organizations to their voice of the customer. So we collect feedback, we track social media, and we tell the companies how they're doing. And a couple things about us, we're bootstrapped, so we have not taken a dime of money. We're a little bit smaller than probably some of the other people here at the table, but we grew to 25 million so far without taking any money. And I think I didn't think about culture at all when we were started. I think most startups, unless you have really, really crazy co-founders, probably have pretty good cultures, because just by their nature, you've got a bunch of people who are, they're totally energized by an idea, they're coming together, maybe they're in a garage, they want to change the world, maybe they'll make a lot of money at the same time. It's kind of a motivating, empowering thing, and people tend to have fairly good cultures. And then you hear a pretty typical story that, they meet a lot of milestones, and with each milestone, they'll get more money, more professionals will come in, and somehow the culture isn't quite the same as it was back when we were 10 people or back when we were 50 people. So I think we were much the same. We didn't think much about our culture. We did have similar, very low turnover, very high employee satisfaction scores. We've won awards for being one of the best workplaces. But I would say the two things that really, really made me think about culture are this. Number one, because we were bootstrapping, we didn't have a full-fledged team when we started. So we ended up hiring a head of sales about 5 years into our existence, and he brought with him a sales team. And they came all from another company. So it's almost like, it's a little bit like a mini merger, and you take the culture of one company and then you sort of graft it onto our company. And we did the same thing with our marketing team. We hired a head of marketing who ended up bringing a bunch of people from her company. And it is when you start to see these juxtaposition of various cultures that you start to realize, oh, this is what our culture is, and this is how it's different from other cultures. So that was one one thing that made me really aware of it. And I think the other thing is that we, because of the product that we have, which is customer experience tracking, and because we were an unknown startup, we went out and sold our product to some really well-known brands. And the companies that it turned out that wanted us are companies that cared very much about the customer experience and were willing to take a chance on an unknown startup. And those tended to be most admired companies. So we have this A-plus list of customers. We have things like Apple Retail and Retail. We have Four Seasons and hotels. We've got companies that care deeply about the customer experience. And we decided that we were going to go out and see what they did. And we not only looked at these companies, at our customers sort of at the company level and at a brand level, we also, because we track their customer experience scores, we went to the highest performing outlets. For example, Gold's Gym, the highest performing Gold's Gym outlet, the highest performing hotel, Hilton Hotel. And we sat down and we talked to their general managers. And we started to find a really consistent thing, and that is that they had extremely strong cultures that the management spent an incredible amount of time nurturing. And what I realized is All companies have cultures. Whether you decide to focus on it or not, your company will have a culture. When you spend a lot of time on it and you align the way that you hire, the way that you train, the way that you fire, the way that you promote, reward, whatever, when you align all that, it becomes an organizing structure. It's almost in lieu of a lot of levels of management, and it makes you much more nimble, because what you're doing is you're articulating a culture, you're hiring people in that agree with it, and then you're able to kind of let them loose, and you're much more productive, you're much more effective. So anyway, this was based on looking at some of the best companies and some of the best performing units in those companies, and they all did the same thing. So it was like, we want to do that. And especially if we're selling this, we got to be able to do it. So we've spent a lot of time now trying to emulate them, and I have to say we're not quite as good as some of our customers, but we're trying hard.
So it sounds like, though, so based on your background, one attribute or quality of your company, and given what you do, I could imagine would be analytical. I mean, BCG in your background, and I almost said Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. So is that part of your culture, what you value, that kind of analytical lens? And then the other thing that I hear when you talk about your clients is sort of valuing of the high performers or the elites. Are either of those things that you think are distinctive about your?
I think something that's really, there are a couple things that are really distinctive about us. One is we truly, truly do not hire assholes, and we will fire them, pardon my, I mean, we will let go of high performers who are corrosive. I mean, I believe very strongly in the sort of dominance of a team versus individual superstars. I would say the other one is, kind of our mantra is no mediocrity. No mediocrity for our customers. We want to help them become great companies. No mediocrity for our team. So we're this interesting mix of super high performance, but a really nice group of people. And so I think that for the right person, that really resonates. For a lot of people, it doesn't, and they don't want to have anything to do with us. But for the right group of people, they feel like, well, this is a great place. I can really strive, and yet I feel like everybody's got my back.
Yeah. Sounds a lot like the Stanford MBA class, and I think the faculty certainly, I'm sure, were influential in supporting the nice people and
Right.
really, really bright. So that was a joke that didn't quite work. Okay, let's say, do you want to?
Sure. Hussein Rahman, I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Jawbone. For those of you that don't know us, we are, I think, according to our friends at Goldman Sachs, now the largest privately held venture-backed consumer electronics company in the world, very quietly. We're backed by Sequoia, Coastal Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz. And, we've had a long, interesting ride. I was actually an undergrad here in the engineering school back in the mid-'90s, and we started the company, started working on ideas in sort of 97, 98, and really formed the company in 99. And culture has been an interesting thing for us because we've had, many sort of ups and downs to the point where, at one point in 2005, the doors were actually chained, and we were nearly out of business, and we sort of bounced back from that and continued to grow. So I would say that a big part of our culture has been sort of this perseverance, total belief in the mission and what we're trying to accomplish. We like to think of ourselves as being in the taste business as well, so design and being design-driven is a huge part of that. So I'd say it's sort of perseverance, design-driven, and making hard decisions that often don't feel like they are the exact right financial decision. I'll give you guys an example. So we make things. We make lots of things in China, and we use medical grade plastics in all our products. They cost 6 times more than what a lot of your typical consumer electronics products do. So to an Asian manufacturer, that is an insane decision, right? They think we are totally batshit crazy, sorry for my language, and it is a fight, and we have to say, no, you got to do this, you got to do that, get rid of the draft angles. And we focus on that, and we ended up winning Design of the Decade from the IDSA for those decisions, and people value that, and it's why we can sell products at higher premiums, better gross margins. We avoid the commoditization cycle that you see with a lot of other consumer electronics products. So it all sort of comes together, the sort of perseverance and fighting for hard decisions, as well as staying true to the value of having a great taste experience and things like that. So.
Andrew Hauser. I was founder and currently founder and co-CEO of Freedom Financial Network and Bills.com, which are 2 sister companies that help people with financial challenges. Started in 2003, shortly after I graduated from the GSB in 2002, with my friend and co-founder Brad Stroh. And we've grown from a spare bedroom to about 550, close to 600 employees today. And I've been able to watch the evolution of the culture, the creation of the culture, from the very start. And I think just listening to your intro, you talked about what is unique or what is rare. And what's interesting is thinking about that, there's nothing that's really unique and rare in theory, right? I could go and cut and paste someone's mission, vision, and values and put them on my website and call them my own. And that wouldn't do me a whole lot of good. What's unique and rare is living it and believing in it. That's hard. I can take any 7 values in the world, but if I don't believe in them and I don't live them every day, then that's not really going to do me a whole lot of good. And I think that is the challenge for any entrepreneur. It's constant. We talk about constancy, consistency every single day. You have to be living those values. You have to be living what you tell your employees you care about. And you can never be off. They say a cook is judged by their worst meal. I like to say a leader is judged by their worst interaction. You walk in every day for 200 days and you live your values and you say what you need to say about your customers, about your employees, and then on the 201st day you walk in and you make some offhand comment about your employees or about your customers. That's the comment people are going to remember. And that one comment can undermine years of work. So we talk about responsibility, we talk about accountability, we talk about getting good people in the door, getting bad people out of the door. But if you just talk about it and you don't actually do it, you don't give people the responsibility, you don't hold people accountable, you don't get I won't use the word, I'll be the only person at the table that doesn't swear in the intro.
We'll get you eventually.
Yeah. No, you didn't, sorry.
Part of the culture.
But if you don't live that, then you don't have a culture.
So let me ask this question. I think on this issue of living it, what are the things, the specific behaviors, routines, things that you do on a regular basis to reinforce and to create that culture? So what does it actually look like? If we were to, follow you around with a camera for, a month, what would be the kinds of interactions, events, things that really reflect where the culture is created in your organizations? And anybody?
Well, sorry, did you want to take it? I was thinking about, there's informal ways and there's formal ways. And, informally, for example, we have an office in Phoenix with about 350 employees. I go there once a month for a few days to a week a month, and when I walk in, I walk around the entire office. It's now enormous. It's 80,000 square feet, and I say hi to everyone and try to shake as many hands as I can when I first walk in. It seems like a relatively basic thing, but I've gotten so much feedback, both direct and indirect, on how much it means to these people to have me just walk in and ask them how things are going. It takes me, maybe an hour that first day that I'm in the office, an hour to 2 hours, just to walk around to all 350 people, say hi, say good morning, what's the latest. Those are informal things. Informally, just the decisions you make to get rid of people, the communications you have. But then there's the formal things. We stole a page out of the Stanford's book. We have brown bag lunches every month where I get in the room about this size, and anyone that wants to bring their lunch comes by and asks me whatever question they want. We have a founders corner on intranet every week. We update it with news and things that back up those values and our vision that we're trying to create. So both formally and informally, your actions every day and every week help support that.
I think we're going through a process right now where we're just over 100 people. We're like 110 people, and we need to be much more proactive about our culture. So what we've done is we took our corporate vision, which we worked on about a year ago, and then we worked out all our values, and then we kind of refreshed the values with a new crop of people. And then we go to each department head and we say, what is your department head mission? And then make sure that that's relating to the corporate mission. And then what are your metrics? How do you know? What does this look like at the end of the year, and how do you know that you've succeeded? You've hit it out of the ballpark. What is, a single and then we meet. And in some cases we meet monthly, in some cases we meet, every quarter, and we just see, are you on track? if you're not on track, is there a problem, or do we have the wrong metrics? But you're kind of you're getting everybody to define in really, really concrete terms what their role is specifically in supporting that overall mission, and then you are giving them a way to see how they're doing and feel accountable for it. And so it kind of makes the whole organization hum together. And I always find these conversations a little bit theoretical. So one of my favorite examples is the best Gold's Gym in the Gold's Gym system. It happens to be in the middle of Washington State, and the guy who runs it, their mission is to make their community, the Wenatchee Valley, the fittest community in America. And he's given each department, a role, and he says things like to the front desk people, he says, when you pick up the phone in less than 2 rings, you are likely helping somebody to be able to play with their grandchildren in their 70s. And that takes a very kind of theoretical, fitness, blah, blah, and it's making it really concrete. It's making it visual, it's making it a powerful story, and suddenly it's not about answering the phone. Wow, it's about helping this person take that first step toward fitness and playing with their grandchildren. And a couple other things he does is, I don't know if you guys know anything about the fitness industry, but some of their sacred cows are, they want to lock you in. They want you to pay a high initiation fee. They want to lock you in with the longest contract possible. And they want to make it really painful for you to get out of that contract. So if you move, you have to fax in your new residence papers or your new lease or they make it really, really hard. And this guy said, is that serving our mission of making this the fittest community in America? No. What would it take for us to get the results that we need, the retention that we need, without a lockup, without high initiation fees? And they got rid of them. This is unheard of in the fitness. They are still one of the highest performing gyms. And I think when you walk in the door of that gym as a customer or as a prospective customer, you feel that these people want to help you on your journey. And they're not just kind of cleaning up the machines. That is a totally different experience from your average gym. So this is a really concrete example of what it means to have that culture. And the people, he will fire people. He's not interested in people necessarily having super toned bodies, although he himself has one. He wants people who care very much about other people, convey that, and really buy into that mission. It's extraordinarily powerful. So that's just a concrete example that I find very inspiring.
And I kind of bet that it's pretty hard to get that attitude and those practices to diffuse throughout the other Gold's Gym.
We're working on it.
Working on it,
But
yeah.
yes, it is.
Listen?
It's interesting. In my experience, this is the only job I've ever had. So, and we interact with lots of different kinds of companies, big ones like AT&T and smaller ones that are, application partners of ours and things like that, startups, 5 people to, Deutsche Telekom, which has 250,000 people. And you see it's sort of a wide range of cultures. And I think that the thing that I've realized is that each culture in each company has to be appropriate for that company. So it's really hard to take something that you see as a best practice somewhere else and try to impose that into your organization. We do this a lot too. It was interesting to hear you talk about, lots of people coming in from the outside. Obviously, as you grow and you scale, you hire people who've had jobs in other places, and you can't grow everyone from the internal organization. So the first thing I tell all the execs I hire is to forget everything you learned in all those other places. Your experience is about helping us not make the same mistakes, but it's a totally new playbook. And let's not even think about the things that we did in the past. We have to sort of have the appropriate systems and culture for where we are today. Doesn't mean that we don't have values that have sort of permeated us for a long time. And you have to live it, and the way you live it, I think, changes as the company changes, as the company grows, as you get international, you have multiple offices in places. You have to do different things all the way along and constantly be watching it and evolving with it. And do what's appropriate for your organization, because it's not going to be the same for different people depending on your product or your service or any of those things. So that's important. I'll give you an example from our past. We make these headset products, and a lot of our customers, like AT&T, they make you put your device into their standardized packaging, which reduces a lot of the differentiation you get or the way you can explain and tell the story around what you're doing. And it was a huge fight for us because we had worked it into contracts that we would, get our own packaging and be able to do our special thing at the point of sale. And there was a regime change, merger, things like that. It was the singular days. It became AT&T, all those contracts went out the window. And there was a period of time where we didn't actually have Job 1 products on the shelf because we refused to sell. It was our biggest customer, and they were trying to impose their will in terms of making us fit a certain way and do a certain thing. And we just said, no, we're not going to do it, and therefore we're not going to sell our product on your shelves. And that was a hard decision. It was our biggest customer. You can imagine what the venture guys felt like at a board level. They thought we were crazy. But we sort of had a long-term view, and we said, you know what, if you, again, allow this to happen and don't give us the ability to be true to what our values are and what we want our brand to stand for, then it's a slippery slope, right? And you've got to have people on your team, on your board, that are willing to go with you on that, right? And it's hard.
So when I think about, what are the daily interactions that you have that reinforce or describe the culture of a company, I kind of break it down in two ways. One is, as an individual, as a CEO, what interactions do you have and what are the messages that you give off? But let me start first with more the process side. What are the things that we do as a company that everybody that comes through the company experiences in a very consistent way? So first off is, we did spend time, I guess like everybody, sitting down and deciding what are the core values that describe us, that describe the founders, describe the company we want to be, describe the relationships we want to have with our customers. We spent a lot of time trying to think about this. When we started to hire, we tried to convert those core values into behavioral characteristics that we could use to select the right people. So when looking at a group of very talented people, how do you select the people that culturally are going to be the best fit for you? So one of the things we do is everybody that's in the company, we train in a standard methodology for recruiting. We use a behavioral interviewing process. Everybody learns the language. Everybody becomes accustomed to it. And every single person that comes into the company goes through a rigorous recruiting process where, everybody has a role in the process. It's divvied up across an entire interview team. And then when we finish the process, when we come back to talk about that particular candidate, we do it as a team. And we literally call it gun to head. The decision at the end of the meeting is gun to head, are you say hire or do you say not hire? And it's a unanimous decision. So everybody takes responsibility for people that come into the company because they played a direct role in it. And if the process is hard, what you find is that even though I may not know you, you may work in a different office than I do, if I know that you went through the exact same rigorous process, I feel confident that you're good because you went through the same filter that I did. So once the employees come in, the other thing we talk about is wanting to be able to evaluate and communicate how people are doing. So we're also less so in the startup phase of this new company, but in the operations phase of Fiber Tower, we were very rigorous about defining the PP&D, the performance evaluation structure we would use for the people in the company. And some of it was company-related objectives, some of it was personal-related objectives, and most of the personal objectives tied back to the core values of the company. But we would tie compensation, and we would tie, even more importantly, we would tie equity to the high performers in the company. So one of the processes we used to go through is we would stack rank employees in the company, and we would disproportionately divvy up equity at the end of every year. So my goal was to take 100% of equity and give 80% of it to the A players. And that just reinforced a culture of people that were trying to exceed their own capabilities. And then also having a very humane way for people that aren't working in the company to exit them out of the company in a respectful and reasonable process where they just can't be part of your organization. And then things I talked about earlier like feedback, being able to address issues in a very straightforward way. Culturally for us, that was a big deal. So you would often see people leave a meeting where it's a very civil meeting, but hard decisions need to be made, and they might grab somebody at a meeting and say, I understand what you were trying to do, but this behavior that you demonstrated was inconsistent with that goal. And you may not have realized it at the time, but if you take it in the vein that that person is there to help you be better at what you do, it's a very, very productive experience. And then I guess finally, I think it's the individual aspect. What do you do as an individual in a company? So I guess similar to Andrew, we had 14 offices. I used to travel to every office on a regular circuit. I would go visit all 14 different offices in different states. And while I was there, I would try and pick a couple different positions there, and I'd spend a day with them. So if it was a field tech, I'd spend the day in the field with them. If it was, one of our account managers, I might go visit some of our customers. But I wanted to make sure that I knew every single role in the company, what they did, and they knew that I knew that. So that when I was talking about that or when I was experiencing them, in terms of evaluating them, I had a greater feeling for it. And then the final thing that we did was, it's very difficult at the top of a company to recognize the really amazing things that happen. And what you find is there are heroic things that happen every day that never really get talked about. So we implemented a recognition process, sort of an employee-based recognition process we called shout-outs, where any employee in the company could give any other person a recognition award. And that person would get it was a $50 gift certificate, but the requirement to do it is they had to draft an email to the entire company and describe what happened. And we didn't make that up. We stole that from another company, but it was great because people had the opportunity to hear, even, at different levels in the company, amazing, heroic things that were happening. And then the final thing was creating transparency. And we tried to over-communicate to the company. So we had a policy that after every board meeting, I would hold a company-wide communication and I would share what was described. Not all of it was always positive, but at least they knew exactly where we stood. So I never viewed my role as a marketing role to the employees in the company. I viewed myself as sort of providing the current direction of what we were doing and what was important for us to be successful. So that was how we
So let me just pick up on this, this feedback. And again, one of the things you're known for is your credibility in the touchy-feely realm, high-performance leadership. But I don't think there's a kind of another company here that wouldn't say, no, we really value giving honest and accurate feedback. But yet, it's hard to do. What is it that you found to be kind of most challenging about really living consistently that value of being honest and constructive in providing feedback? I mean, and why is it so rare?
So first off, the ironic thing is I'm the only one on the team that didn't actually take the class. So I actually took it through exec ed to go figure out what everybody was talking about. It's a process that requires continuity. It's a process that if you do it once, it can be very destructive. So it's, we always looked at it as a method of being able to, in doing a startup, you never know if you're going to be successful. If you look at the odds, it's uncanny how many of them actually fail. So we viewed it as a process that even if we did the best we could and the company didn't work, we wanted to be better professionals, better individuals, better executives, better whatever it was. And we viewed this as a process for ourselves. So in many ways, it was a very selfish process because it was a way for us to get feedback from people that we really respected. The hardest part was getting people to trust the process. So we grew very quickly. We hired people from a lot of large, ironically, wireless carriers. We had a CTO from one of the major carriers join us. And we would always give them a free ride through the first feedback session. So I do an executive feedback session. And inevitably, I would talk with them afterwards, and they would all go, that was really rough. You guys were tough on each other. And, it was interesting because that was a symptom of the fact that even though everything that was being discussed needed to be discussed, and it was done in a very frank and maybe too efficient a way, he had never experienced that in where he came from. There was always the superficial aspect of communication, the 360 evaluation, the review that comes from a boss, but not something that's very specific. So for us, when we did a feedback, it was 3 positives, 3 negatives, and every single one that you did had to be backed up by a specific example. You had to say, in this situation, you did this, and here was the way that I perceived your behavior. You can't argue with that. And the goal was not to argue it. The goal was to take that, because that was that person's perspective. You may disagree with it, but that was what they felt. And I think so implementing this was training the people how to do it, having the continuity that it would happen on a contiguous, repeatable basis, and then building the trust that it wasn't done to, as an offensive weapon against somebody, but it was really done, the value was for you. So for example, for us, HR never attended a feedback session. Not a single comment that ever was given in feedback affected your actual pay or equity in the company. It was purely for you. So it was just a way that we interpreted that particular technique.
Okay, thanks. So let me ask Andrew a different question. I've sort of thought about some questions based on the particular challenges that the organizations might face. How do you think about or deal with the clash between your company's culture and how you think about what you're doing, and then maybe the industry values, philosophy, or culture, right? So in consumer credit, certainly during a period of time, it was, spend, 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 borrow, borrow, borrow. And to the extent that you're really trying to operate differently in that context, how do you protect your organization from the philosophy in the industry?
Yeah, that's a very fitting question. Our, not just consumer credit in general, which has, as we all know, had some issues over the past several years, but our industry in particular, when we started the company, it was an innovative idea, a way of working out consumers' debts outside of the context of a bankruptcy. We were one of the few people doing it. We became the industry leader, but it was a classic low barrier to entry business that resulted in a flood of competitors, especially after all the mortgage people went out of business. They jumped into our industry. So there became a very big disconnect between what we were saying we are doing for customers and our core values and our belief that we are this white knight here to help consumers, and we will do anything to help our customers, and it's a very emotional, high-touch product. And the rest of the industry, not all of the industry, but certainly what got picked up in the press, a very, very big disconnect. It actually, I don't want to go into too many details, but we wound up, because we were the industry leader and the industry started to get a bad name, we wound up getting sued by the state of California. And so here we are, having built this culture around belief in our employees, belief in what we're doing, taking care of customers, helping people through this difficult emotional point in their life. And all of a sudden, the state of California is suing us and saying that we're taking advantage of consumers. So flip that, that's a pretty two big different things. We're helping consumers through this emotional period. We're taking advantage of consumers is what the state of California said. So how do we deal with that? It's difficult, but communication is extraordinarily important. You can't spin that, right? It's in the news, it's on TV, it's on blogs. Your competitors are selling against it every day. So you're not spinning it. You're being open and honest. And you're communicating every day, every week. It was an emotional period for us, but I think part of it is your belief, which is contagious. True belief in what you're doing is contagious, right? It is. If people see that you really are passionate about what you're doing, if you're believing in what you're doing, they're going to believe in it. And it starts with the founders, but then it goes to the next level down. That's really, really important. It's getting good people in the door early as an entrepreneur. Those are your ambassadors that are going to carry your message to the rest of the company. And how do you get good people as a startup? That is a crucial question, because it's going to pay dividends for tough events like this. But so communication, consistency, honesty, and then having a really strong management team that truly believes in what they're doing.
And am I correct in my recollection of the case that it was written about Freedom Financial is that you actually sort of fought this suit longer and harder than some of your advisors would have? They would be like, just settle it or let it go. And you didn't. You kind of persevered in contesting it.
Yeah, that's correct. There was a case written, which some of you may have read in the New Ventures or one of the entrepreneurship classes. The key decision at the time was, okay, we have the state of California telling us we're doing all these bad things. We have millions of dollars in potential litigation expenses coming up. We have the press, and when a regulator, this is something that they don't teach enough about in business school, especially in this environment. Regulation is everywhere. When a regulator decides they're coming after you, it's not just a negotiation. They're calling the ABC station, the NBC station. They're trying to do everything in their power to sort of press you into a settlement. And so we have this decision to make. Do we just settle this, pay a lot of money, accept that we did something wrong, and move on? Or do we fight this and try to deal with the consequences to employee morale, to public relations, to our competitors' ability to sell against us? And we ultimately decided to fight it because this is what we've been telling our managers all along. We are not doing anything wrong. We believe in what we're doing. We're helping people. Sure, there's knuckleheads in our industry, but we're doing the right thing. And we've ultimately decided that if we turned around and just agreed, okay, yeah, we're doing something wrong, we'll get out of the state of California, we'll pay all this money in fines, that would send the wrong message. And economically, it was a tough decision, but in the long run, it certainly was the right decision, yeah.
Did you win?
We won. I mean, we settled very favorably, I would say. It did not actually go to trial, but the settlement was extraordinarily favorable with, we didn't have to change any aspect of our business, which is very unusual
for
for
you.
a settlement, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Could I say one thing about the feedback? Because I can't actually stress enough. I mean, we've learned this lesson the hard way, because to get through some of the tough times we had, we built deep friendships with people in the organization. And as you scale quickly, some of those people don't scale with you, but yet you're close to them and they're friends. And the thing that I learned the hard way was that if you don't give people straight, direct, complete feedback, it is much worse than if you thought you could manage it and sort of package it in a way. And the thing that we do, I think, well now that we never did before, not quite as organized in the way that you guys do, but we tell people, look, this feedback is coming to you for one reason and one reason only, which is that it's to make you better so that we can succeed as an organization. That's the only reason you're giving the feedback. Because if you're not getting the feedback, it means we don't care anymore, and that's a bad problem, right? So I think if you start those conversations with that sort of mindset, that the reason we're doing this is it's an investment, and if you don't understand it, it's a way of sort of working through that. People appreciate that, right? Who doesn't want to sort of be able to look in the mirror and really understand? And sometimes folks just don't do it well, right? So I think establishing that right up front, that it is about being better and about elevating everyone.
So let me follow up on that and actually ask Amy a question, because you're in the business, in part, of helping your clients to use feedback from customers to make them better. And so, how do you influence the culture of your clients so that they're really using the data in the way that they should be and not biasing it? And I'll tell a little anecdote of my experience recently, actually a number of times, with AT&T, which I don't remember whether they're a client or not. So, so they're clearly getting lots of feedback, and I was on the phone 3 or 4 times trying to correct some issue. And at the end, I always got, have I answered all your questions? Because you're going to be getting a survey, and I really want you to be able to give me an A+ or an H or whatever it was when they call you for the survey. And I certainly felt kind of coerced into that. And I'm like, well, if that's what they're doing, is that data really meaningful? So how do you influence the culture in your clients?
So we try and share best practices. We host a best practices conference once a year, and we bring all of our clients together. A lot of them get up and give presentations. In the example that you gave, it is absolutely a worse practice to in any way try and skew the results of a survey. And in fact, in the case of Apple Retail, you will be fired if you even so much as tell a customer that they might get a survey. You can't even mention it. You can't mention. We try and share that we have this concept of all companies say they care about the customer experience. Maybe 10% really care about it. Another 40% are kind of semi-care about it, and then a lot of them don't really care. They just have to, it's like motherhood and apple pie. And so we have this concept of believers, seekers, and then non-believers. And I guess our feeling is we try and share the best practices of the believers, the ones who have shown they really understand it. And some will gravitate, and then we really work closely with the seekers to help them. And then and at the end of the day, we feel better if somebody gets 10% better and they don't become the absolute best. That's still 10% better. So I mean, we sort of help people wherever they are on that journey. But we don't lower our prices. We don't. So we end up with a heavily skewed toward the believers because we have the best product, but the functionality that we have is most interesting to people who really care about this versus people who are paying lip service to it. One interesting thing about our product and the topic of culture is, we were talking about this before this started, stories are like an incredible part of the culture. The stories about the founders, and you were mentioning one, but one thing that we found with our customers is we have, there's always a question that's an open-ended question, and you get these really precious customer comments from time to time, and some of them become, just legend in the organization. So you stop getting just the co-founder stories or the superstar employee stories, and you start getting the customer stories. This customer had this experience. You hear these, like, for example, about Nordstrom, what Nordstrom's employees will do for their customers. And so we found that our platform, ironically, does strengthen culture as those things become almost urban legends within an organization.
That's great. Okay. So last question, then we'll open up for Hossein. So Jawbone is known for cutting edge, and this is a quote, cutting edge design, coming up with products that people don't know they need, but then they can't live without. I'm like, wow, that's great. That's like, I want one of those. But so this sounds a lot like a culture of innovation, engineering, design being ahead of customers. But it seems like there are lots of stories that the danger of that kind of culture is that you can become insular and insensitive to customers, and it's kind of like, well, we know best, you'll know what you want when we tell you what it is. And then you sort of lose your market. How do you either balance that, protect against that possibility, and think about, we want to listen, but we also want to push
It's a great
forward?
question. I think frankly, that's an existential challenge for a company like us, right? Because so much of what we do, especially as we push into new categories and new markets, you're looking around a corner and you're trying to guess what people want. So it's on multiple different vectors. It's also in terms of how do we manage our investment against those new things and sort of take it step by step and phase, test something, see if it works, go behind it. It's a little bit of what we call a chasing model. So if it's working really well, we double down and push into it. So those are kind of just financial risk things that we do. But fundamentally, I think that what we try to do is, and this is sort of the way we build products actually, is we make a map, and we don't do MRDs or PRDs or any of those things. We don't do focus groups. We don't do any of it. We basically sit around, and there's a core group of about 6 people in the company who work on this, and we make a map of, so here's the way the world works today with all the kinds of devices that we interact, and where are the friction points in the way that we use these devices or other people? And then you can get a lot of data from customers and people around. Where are the friction points? What are the things that don't work? Where would they have to push a button here or take that thing out or whatever? And then we start to say, okay, well, if we could solve that problem and innovate, do we need to push the silicon guys, or do we need to build networking technology that supports it? And then we start to push on all those different threads and say, and then when we build stuff, we say, how are we resolving ourselves against this experience continuum? And ultimately, it's about using technology to make things easier for people, allowing them to communicate in places they didn't do before, things like that. And so that's one of the ways from a product perspective we try to resolve it. We say it's about making things easier and resolving experiences. Wouldn't it be great if you could do this, right? So it is a little bit Star Trek-y or Minority Report and some of that stuff, but it's fun. And I think that you're going to make some mistakes for sure, and it's how you structure yourself to iterate quickly and
be able to
work
recover.
through that. Yeah, and be able to recover. And it's one of the reasons we almost died a few times. And it just changes. So we have this sort of multi-headed system to attack that.
Can I add something on that? Because our customers use it 2 ways. There are 2 components. One is service and one is product. And on the service side, a lot of our companies, they have strong cultures, so they delegate a lot of responsibility to their front lines. And they don't micromanage. Like some franchise organizations you'll go into and you'll feel like you're getting the scripted, did you find everything you needed? And but others, you actually have a real conversation. So we tend to serve those groups. And what happens is different people try different things at different at different stores or different banks or whatever it is. And then on our system, you start to see customer satisfaction is spiking, customer satisfaction is dropping. What's going on here? Turns out this manager came up with a really innovative solution to a problem. I've got a great example. I'm going to try and camouflage who it is, but basically customer satisfaction across this company tanked. And one guy looked at it and he realized that salesperson and Rude kept coming up with the low scores on a particular product. So he asked the salespeople and they said, yeah, it's off warranty, and everybody's really pissed off when they find out it's off warranty. So he told them when they came to work the next day, they all own this particular product themselves. He took it from them for a day, and he gave it back 24 hours later. And customer satisfaction in that store spiked, because now people came in with this product off warranty, And all of the sales reps that they ran into said, oh, that sucks. That happened to me the other day. I am so sorry. Bad news is we don't, it's off warranty. The good news is and it was the same message delivered with genuine empathy, and that was it. And it was like a brilliant, smart frontline thing. And then somebody at corporate saw this spike, went in, found out what it was, told the rest of the organization, scores went up everywhere. So that's on the service, on the product
It's a
side.
lot of listening.
Right.
You gotta
Learning.
listen
But it's
carefully.
also allowing people who are in the front lines, communicating with the
Right.
marketplace to use their judgment and deal with the nuance. On the product side, Hyatt is one of our customers, and they started a new concept, Hyatt Place, for like the 30-something business travelers, and they did a whole bunch of focus groups, and they're going to get rid of things like the front desk and all these things that are sort of standards in hotels. And then they put it out there with us, and they were just monitoring. They had a couple of hotels, and they were trying, should we serve this kind of food or that kind of food in terms of the product side, and just really, really tracking it and being very innovative and quickly changing if it wasn't working. And so just being very, very nimble about how and not expecting to get it 100% right when they rolled it out, even though it was I think it comes down to ways to get that listening and feedback.
Well, on that note, I think we should listen to our front lines here. So if there are questions, raise your hand. And if you want to address it to a particular panelist or any panelist, just note that. So let's start over here on the right.
Okay, hi. My question is, at which point in the growth of a company do you start actively thinking about culture as opposed to just doing stuff? And it's really, very early stages. You mentioned 5 employees, 10, 20 employees. So at which point do you start talking really about culture, and then, I understand later on it becomes HR, but culture?
Just for me, it was at that moment that we stopped worrying about survival. Which
is a part of culture,
Up
by the way.
until then, you don't have time for culture. You're just trying to,
I think it starts from the very first hire. I mean, whether you like it or not, it's happening. So, I think that one good thing about the GSB is that you do, relative to other business schools, I think people come out of here with a lot of OB classes, touchy-feely, people do care about it here. And it is a great thing. We came out and we said, I don't know what it means, but I want to create a good culture, from the very first day. And I think part of that is a little bit the GSB's influence. But then I wouldn't say it's HR. HR is an administrative function. Culture comes from the founders, from the managers. It doesn't come from the HR's office.
I agree you can't delegate to HR, but I think that your hiring, firing, training is so
They can
integral.
administrate
Your
it.
HR should be a very important function in.
So I talk
They can
about
administrate
administrative
culture.
HR who make sure you're complying with the laws and don't want you to get sued and
Right.
blah, blah, blah. That's HR, and that, I would never delegate the culture, what we talk about in Stanford is HR. I would never delegate that to the HR department, right?
I agree with them. I think it starts from day one. And I think that, it's certainly in my personal experience, you don't think about it, but there's no organization that doesn't have a culture, right? If you don't care about it that much, that's a culture,
Yeah.
right? It's a culture of one type of thing. I mean, it's interesting. I see a lot of people who are repeat entrepreneurs who become a lot more disciplined about it in terms of the systems and processes they put on, implementing right at the beginning, the second or third time or the fourth time they do it. And, in our experience, it absolutely starts with day one, and you think about it all the time. Because for us, everything we do is based on people, which inherently ties back to culture, so.
So you've all been leading high growth organizations, and my guess is at some point there's been a point where you just need a lot of people very quickly, and maybe the quality of talent that you find doesn't fit well or mesh well with your culture. How do you evaluate that trade-off?
I actually, we stole a practice from Zappos, and if you guys are interested in culture and you're in Las Vegas, take a tour of Zappos. It's free. It's a really great.
This morning, actually, yeah.
It's great. But what they do is they divide their interviews into functional interviews and cultural fit interviews, because when you're in that situation and you have that, gap to fill, you start to look past those little things that are signals that this might not be a cultural fit. And so if you delegate that decision about cultural fit to another group that has no vested interest in filling that specific role, then you kind of, and so we've done that as well now. So and it's hard, it's really hard, but you just have to remind yourself it's much more painful to hire the wrong person, much more painful.
I would say just to use a mistake as an example. If I look back at the periods when we needed to hire quickly, there is a direct correlation between those periods and not hitting the quality that we wanted to get. I mean, you can literally see these pockets of, man, that was a bad sales training class. Oh, that was when we're trying to hire 20 people in a week. Direct correlation. So that would suggest we didn't have the answer for your question, but it is certainly a problem. Yeah.
I think a good way to address that when you're in rapid growth is if you get the right kind of senior leadership team and they're bought into the culture and they're bought into the mission, they can also sort of disseminate that and spread it. And so if you get the right few key hires in the kind of, it becomes a domino effect, right? And that helps you move a lot faster because good people will often bring other good people with them, and they will all sort of figure out how to get aligned with what you're trying to do if you set that out as something that you want them to do. So you can get some leverage from having a talented team.
Okay, it's over here, yes.
I guess it's a similar question, and Scott, you had talked a lot about aligning the practicing, or the hiring practices to your culture. How do you balance that with diversity, so you don't end up with a lot of people who think very much like you? And how do you, how do you balance building a culture and also making sure that you have a diverse group of thought?
It's interesting. I don't think behavioral characteristics, I guess there's different types of diversity, so maybe we should be clear. I mean, there's cultural diversity, there's experience diversity, there's a lot of different types of diversity out there. So I don't think the types of things that we look for behaviorally affect the traditional forms of diversity. And if you look across the companies that, particularly Fiber Tower and our new company, it's incredibly heterogeneous in terms of the people, their backgrounds, cultures, languages, everything is very, very heterogeneous. But what you're really trying to do, I think, where this behavioral interviewing works, is you're trying to look across this melting pot of people and find the common denominators that allow you to knit them together into something that's very cohesive. So the real goal you're trying to do is not to remove the heterogeneity, but rather focus on the homogeneous things that you need to be successful and bring that together. So I think it's kind of the opposite of the way you're thinking about it.
In terms of, I think there's consensus, you gotta hire A's, you gotta hire people who fit your DNA and try to keep the functional part separate from the culture part. All of that being said and done, you gotta live with the realities of the market. There's a shortage of good talent in Silicon Valley. And so you need to, sometimes make hard decisions, and it's not easy to address because the talent shortage is not something that is going to go away in a week or in a month. It may be there for quarters, years. Anything creative, anything out of the box that you could do? I mean, yes, people like to be at a company with good cultures, but then so many other companies also have good cultures. So how do you be able to attract talent in a talent stressed market when you're competing with a lot of other companies who pretty much have a lot of similar values as you? Anything out of the box?
I think that there's a couple of nuances to your question. I mean, I think that, so I'll start with an example. I mean, A talent for Andrew is very different than A talent for me, right? And A talent in one part of the organization is very different than A talent in a different part of the organization. And the way we think about it is that when we find the right people, we often wonder what we did without them, right? And that's always the best sort of measurement of where your organization is. And so I think that, a lot of it depends on a mentality of what a person wants to do. And I see lots of wonderful candidates all the time where, I wish it was more of a fit. And I wish that, if we're competing against Facebook for a software application engineer, that they would rather work on a business that has that software but also has a device versus just, social network. So a lot of it is also the choice of the other person, and it comes back to what is the opportunity? Are they aligned with it? Do they believe in the vision? Do they believe in the story of where you're going? Do they think they can have a material impact on that story? And that to me is fundamentally how you compete, is focusing in on your story. It also helps with alignment, but it also helps attract the right talent in that kind of environment, right? Does that make sense?
I think, you listen to all of us talk about culture, and we clearly all care passionately about it, but talking about good culture is like talking about good education. When you really get down to it, everybody has a very different definition of what it is. And so what I find, this is a problem for us, but if we find someone that we think is a cultural fit and we get them in they talk to at least 3, maybe 2 people, then they just want to join, because they're feeling that cultural fit too, right? So if you've ever worked in an environment or with a team or been in a situation where you just totally feel in flow and you feel like you're getting that, then it's like you want to be there. It's like, this resonates with me. I'm so.
And they'll trade financial upside for that. In my experience, good people will trade potential financial upside for that fit.
Yeah.
Right?
So
It's more important to them.
But the challenge, especially for a much smaller company like ours, is to get them to talk to us a couple times. But slowly but surely, you start to get word of mouth going out, and a lot of our hires are like through friends of friends, and they heard about us, and so I stick with it. You'll find people that really just totally buy into exactly what you want to do, and that's an awesome feeling.
One other thing I'd add, we do a lot of crazy stuff, though, when we find a right candidate. I mean, one of my biggest shareholders is Vinod Kosa, and, he's supposedly a clean tech investor, and here's his consumer electronics company. Vinod actually was on vacation with his family, and he got on his plane and flew to meet a VP candidate of mine, just on his holiday, because it was that important, right? Or I'll have them meet, we will call people 10 times in a day and just not be embarrassed about it, right? And so those are little things that we do that if we think somebody's right and it does feel good, we're just not going to take no for an answer. We often say that no is just one step on the path to yes.
He's not exaggerating.
People like to feel the love.
And then just, one thing that wasn't directly said, although it was indirectly said, is that good people attract good people. Stars attract stars, right? The early people in your door need to believe passionately in what you're doing, carry that torch of the culture. Because when you go into an office for an interview and you meet a bunch of people who think the same way you do, who are good people, who are fun, who look like, I want to work with those people. It is the people that drive the culture. It's the people that attract and retain good people. So those first few hires are pretty damn crucial for you.
Totally.
You cursed.
Oops. It's a minor curse.
We have great employees. I think sometimes you want to make them feel special, and obviously that comes in the form of either benefits or programs that you do. Do you guys have any thoughts in terms of how to keep programs special instead of making it feel like an entitlement over time? We kind of use a free food at Google, for instance, as an example, where, it was a special program at one time, and I don't know if it still is, but I certainly sense a feel of a sense of entitlement when I talk to some folks there. Microsoft had it when they took away the towel service for a period of time. Just would love to get your thoughts on that.
Move out of the Bay Area. Yeah. Go to Phoenix. People will love anything you do for them. Bay Area, it's a tough culture because people are used to being paid well, being treated well. There's a high competition for labor. So how do we? I am being serious. In Phoenix, when we do something like a monthly luncheon, people love it. I get not 100. I get 20 thank you emails out of 350 people. We do it in San Mateo. It's okay. What lunch? Can you give me something more than lunch, please?
But it's also just a sense of how you keep the program special.
Yeah.
But I think you should change up the programs, because things do get stale. It's like you can't keep selling the same service or product forever, or some people can, but they get stale. And I think in the same way, you have to change programs, evolve what's relevant. It's an opportunity for innovation, just like in any other part of your organization.
But what about if you're changing them up and you take something away, right? It's like, okay, well, we're not going to give you free lunch anymore, but we're going to give you free towels.
Right. But that's
The people are pissed off about,
you got to
hey,
sell
took away
it.
my lunch.
You got to say, this is why this thing is better for you, right? We're in a situation right now where we're actually, it's a kind of a funny story, we've got a pretty healthy sort of PTO policy, And it's funny because the top performers are way over accrued on PTO and just,
You gonna do the Netflix thing?
yeah, we're getting rid of all the PTO, and it's an interesting. There's like half the people love the fact that we're getting rid of PTO, and other people are freaked out by it. And so you got to communicate with them and explain why this ultimately is better, and it's about accountability and blah blah blah, right? So
One thing that we've done with this is slightly different than a benefit like a free lunch, but with incentives, a lot of our groups are production-based, and we have incentives. And it's certainly true that we've created some sales incentives that have become more like obligations than incentives. We just expect that we're gonna get this check every week for doing this. So what we've started to try to do in the past couple of years is just set the expectation that this is gonna change every month or every couple months. And people know it's going to change. An incentive influences, especially a short-term incentive, a monthly incentive, weekly incentive, can influence behavior only for so long before it starts to get stale. So how do you prevent people from getting mad when you take one away and give them another? Just set the expectation that there's going to be constant change with respect to those benefits or incentives.
We have a slightly different, we're moving more toward having these things come from, the employees. They're all owners of the company, and they should act like owners. So it's more like, and along the lines of the transparency, we're pushing out more information, giving them a lot of information about how we're doing, how do we want to allocate our budgets, do we want to do this, do we want to do that? And they find when you give people responsibility for making those decisions, instead of it being the company deciding which benefits you will or will not have, it really changes. So an example is we just moved offices, and we are having, people can, if they come from a different country, they can nominate themselves to decorate one of the conference rooms like their country, and there was some budget, and I said, no, skip budgets, don't worry about budgets, just be really creative, and if, and we may ask you questions if we think the budget, people got really upset. They're getting really freaked out. They're like, we don't want to spend that much money. We want to pump the money into other parts of the organization. And so that was that sense of ownership of, this is my company and I'm not really sure. And I love that response. I love that they, it's like instead of, oh, psych, I'm going to go buy a Turkish carpet, hey, wait a minute. I thought it was great.
it's cool.
Yes.
How do you deal with the issue when the senior leadership in the organization begin to develop their microcultures, and then you realize you used to have one culture, now you have multiple cultures, do not necessarily work well with each other?
Sounds like a dysfunctional company.
Yeah, we haven't had that problem
Yeah.
yet, so.
That's the whole purpose of all the things we're talking about, is to try and avoid that. You want to have common objectives, you want to have compensation plans that link the company together. You have to make sure that every discrete part of the organization has some vested interest in everyone else being successful as well. So that's, that would be, that would be a
I
problem.
think he makes a point. Like we have so many different functional areas. We have an office in China, right? And they have a distinctly different culture. And I'll give you a funny story. Like I went there and we took a big office in Shanghai. And the guy that's the GM there had this sort of 70 square meter office. And our office in San Francisco is all open plan, no offices. Everyone sits on the same floor, same desks, everything's, it's very equal. And flat, he had this 70 square meter office. And I said to him, I was like, what are you doing with a 70 square meter office? Like, I don't have a 70 square meter office. And he's like, wow, this is how sort of Asian cultures are. And, they need to sort of see me. And I said, look, you're either like not gonna have an office, or you just like blow out all these spaces and just get conference rooms. If you need to have a private conversation, you can go do that in a conference room. And he's like, well, it's unusual for the way, people do business in Asia. I'm like, I don't care. Then they can go work at a different company. Or, if a vendor doesn't want to do business with us because we don't have offices, then they can decide to do that. So you've got to see where it's right and where it can be additive and the little microculture can help push the organization, and where it's just wrong and it doesn't sort of resolve itself to the core value, you just got to squash it fast. Right?
I think that we struggle with this all the time. And our answer is we are reorganizing and trying something. One thing that we're going through now is what if we organize people in troops, kind of like the military, 6 or 7 people troops, because on the one hand, we want people to be really nimble in their teams, really close to each other, care deeply about each other, but then we also want them to collaborate across. So we had a vertical structure and decisions had to go up before they got made, and that wasn't working, so we reorganized. So I think if you're kind of paying attention to it, and you raise a great issue sort of about as you expand internationally. And now you're transporting your culture far away, but then you're also putting it in a location that's got a different macro culture. How are you respectful of that macro culture in the country in which you're opening a new office, but maintaining some essence of who you are? So I think you face that all the time, and I think to be aware of it and to be willing to change things up in how you structure and organize. And
I think it's just trying to find the best thing. Like, there are things we've learned from our China operation that we're trying to implement back in California in terms of the pace, right, and how fast they turn things relative to what we do. So it's a constant
That's great.
push and pull, and what I try to tell people is try to take the best. We have an office in London. They have a totally different culture, right, in Europe than they do in China. And it's how do you get all these people to have the right kind of tension and push and pull and find the best in each thing, and then try to bring that up and have them each contribute to that.
I mean, a different culture can be between different geography or different marketplace, but can also be between the different functions, right? You have the technology people talking very, very differently with the people who are on the sales and marketing side.
And we struggle with that one too, like the sort of the engineer gods kind of culture. Is that what you're talking about a little bit? Yes, no? Yeah.
But different functional areas are going to have different microcultures, right? And there's going to be, I mean, you guys will see this, I mean, there's tension. Sometimes that's good, right? Because everyone has a different role, and I think what you've got to do is make everyone understand what their role is in the greater good and how they need to interoperate with each other. And this is sort of a foundation for process, right? Of how they all work together to push the whole thing forward.
The other thing that strikes me is, again, as I go back to the beginning of the conversation when you all talked about the distinctive features of your organizations and your culture, there were some aspects that really are immutable. Like, it's hard for me to imagine you having a subculture, no matter where you were operating, what industry, where there was sort of a predatory mindset. It's like, we just wouldn't do that. And it's hard for me to imagine, again, having, people who are like, yeah, we just need to butter them up until we can get rid of them, not, being not forthright. And so it seems like the kind of the key to this question is like, well, what really are the most important and defining characteristics of your culture that you don't ever compromise on? And then what are things that, well, we will have, different food in the London office, we'll have tea instead of coffee, and that's it.
I think, well, to get to that, talking about functional teams, when we talk, we a big difference between our sales team, which in our industry are our stars, highly compensated, relatively highly compensated, and then customer service, who are fulfilling the product. And certainly, to your point, there's tension. Customer service people say the salespeople are over-promising. How can I deliver? The salespeople are saying, I'm losing customers because you're not supporting my customers. Customer service people are saying, oh, these salespeople make so much money, they go on these trips and they do all this fun stuff and they make these huge incentives. Certainly we have that. So how do we deal with it? It does come back to the culture. What is our fundamental goal? Our fundamental thesis when we started this company is that there is a hugely underserved market of people that have financial problems, that the existing solutions out there are either predatory or just not that good, and that we're going to come in with a solution that is ROI-based for the consumer, where we get paid based on our results, and we are going to always do what's in the best interest for that client, whether that's up front when we're selling the client. If they're not right for our program, guess what? We'll refer you. We have a network of companies. If you should be refinancing your mortgage, we'll refer you to a mortgage company. If you should be declaring bankruptcy, we have a nationwide network of attorneys that we'll refer you to. Up front, we're going to do the right thing. On the back end, the customer service, we're always going to do the right thing for the customer. We don't have average handle times. We don't say be off the phone in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Stay on the phone as long as it takes to resolve that customer issue. So that culture of always doing what's right helps with that conflict. And another thing that, and then I'll stop and let other people go on, but is when you have this tension, sometimes maybe between engineers and support, or with sales and support, when a customer service rep comes and complains about the generous compensation of the sales, and you're free to apply for that job.
Totally.
It is a tough.
That was my first reaction.
You're measured as a salesperson. You're measured every day. It's like being an athlete. You come to work every day, and your numbers are on the board. And if you don't work, guess what? You're out the door. That's a very different job than being a customer service agent. If you want to try it, you are free to try it.
So let me, I'm watching time, and I probably should have kind of punctuated this point and come to the sort of closing part a little earlier, but is there anything that, any insights about culture or startups that, remain unsaid that you would just be not satisfied if you didn't leave this group with that last pearl? So we've got about 5 minutes. Anything not yet said?
And this is maybe potentially a little controversial, but what I have learned is the value of the team versus the value of individuals. And at the end of the day, if you're like me and you've gone to great schools and you've gone to business school and you've worked in certain organizations, unless you've played a team sport, you know nothing about teamwork, really. You probably think you're doing teamwork when you all huddle together, divide up tasks, run off, do your task, come back together. That's not teamwork. And I think that, and we hire a lot of people just like me in our company, and so we're all learning to be better, true team players. And I think a book that was really influential for me is called Tribal Leadership, and it's by a professor out of USC, and he looked at all these different organizations and listened to the language that they had, and he divided cultures into 5 different cultures. I won't bore you with it, but it really talks at the end of the day about when you have true teamwork, you get to a stage where you're not really going to have these interdepartmental conflicts because everybody is going to be working toward that same goal. And he finds that in only about 20% of companies. And the vast majority are in a level where it's all about, I'm great, others not so much. Sorry about that. The ingoing assumption is don't trust until they earn your trust, rather than trust until they don't earn your trust. The ingoing assumption is to withhold information rather than to share information. It's a great read, and if you read it, you'll probably it'll resonate with you in different places that you've worked, and that really made me think about how little I understood about true teamwork and how many of the people around me didn't really understand it either. So,
I guess the way I would leave it is, when we talk about good culture, it's a very amorphous concept. What's good for me may be different for Andrew, maybe different based on different organizations, different requirements and so forth. But what is I always find interesting is particularly when you're interviewing people can't always describe what the perfect culture is, but they can very clearly tell you what bad cultures they've been part of. So, what are the behaviors? It could be that one experience of the 201st experience they had with an executive that was completely out of character with, what a company says. But, it's a matter of feeling what's right for you at that moment in time and what's right for the employees that are there. But there's so much of good culture is just common sense. It's just things that there are just certain things you don't do. You treat people respectfully. You have to, you have to give people, you have to empower them. You got to allow them to make decisions. As long as there's a core baseline of values that you subscribe to, everything else you put on top is okay. It's just the bad stuff is universal.
Okay. So I think a lot has already been said. I would say that for some of you that are considering entrepreneurship, especially a lot of you have worked for, whether it's private equity, banking, consulting, you haven't really had to think about this developing of the culture. One thing to think about as a founder and an entrepreneur is your visibility is extraordinarily powerful, and more so than you can even imagine. There is, a magnifying glass on everything you do, everything you say.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. And a lot of people talked about feedback. Feedback's extraordinarily important. You got to be careful about doing it in public. Anything that you say, some small constructive feedback, is magnified 10 times by the person that's receiving it, just because of your role as the founder in a company. And that's a hard thing to adjust to when you're out of business school. That, wow, these people are hanging on my every word. I come in the office and I look stressed out. That stresses other people out. I come in the office and I'm happy. That makes other people happy. It's a very surreal experience when you start to realize how visible you are and how much people are looking at your every action, and every action that you take is creating that culture.
Last word.
I totally agree with that. I mean, it's a constant evolution in learning, because that visibility and that sort of how people hang on what you say is changing all the time, and it's different. Different people react to things differently, and I would totally agree with that. I think the thing that I would say to take away that probably people won't tell you about culture is that it's it's very, very dynamic, right? And there are core values that Scott talks about that are just sort of fundamental things of you got to decide what you want to do, and those things will be part of the character forever. But in terms of the systems and the incentives and rewards and all that stuff, I mean, it changes a lot. And, you know, I think you got to be prepared for that iteration cycle, especially in an entrepreneurial environment. And it's okay. It's okay. And I would say always remember that take a little bit of a longer-term view than feels necessarily comfortable.
Okay, on that note, please join me in thanking our panel.